The story of Adam and Eve extends beyond Cain, Abel, and Seth. Hidden details in Genesis and ancient texts reveal the existence of other children and their role in humanity's origins. Today, we will explore these discoveries and how they broaden our understanding of the Bible's early chapters. This video will provide fascinating answers and revealing details that connect tradition, archaeology, and history. Get ready to expand your understanding and uncover shocking, lesser-known aspects of Adam and Eve's descendants. Genesis, as the opening of the biblical canon, is far more than a simple origin story. It is a narrative rich in symbolism and spiritual meaning. From the opening words, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth," the text sets the stage for a story about creation, the fall, and redemption. Central to this narrative are Adam and Eve, the primordial humans whose lives and choices shaped the destiny of the world. However, like any dense and complex story, much is left between the lines. One of the most intriguing questions concerns the other sons and daughters briefly, but mysteriously mentioned in chapter 5. The beginning of Genesis introduces an idyllic setting. God creates the world in 6 days and rests on the 7th. Adam, formed from the dust of the ground, and Eve, made from one of his ribs, are placed in the Garden of Eden to tend and keep the divine creation. Their relationship with God is intimate and direct, but it is also marked by free will. This freedom culminates in their fall when, tempted by the serpent, they disobey God and eat from the forbidden tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This singular event not only expels them from Eden, but also irrevocably alters the relationship between God and humanity. After their expulsion, the story of Adam and Eve shifts focus to their offspring. First, we meet Cain and Abel, two brothers representing drastically different paths in life. Cain, the farmer, and Abel, the shepherd, become symbols of human rivalry, with their conflict culminating in the first murder recorded in the Bible. This tragic moment not only breaks a family, but also introduces a lineage marked by violence and estrangement from God. As punishment, Cain is cursed to wander the earth as a fugitive, highlighting the gravity of his actions. However, the narrative does not end there. After Abel's tragedy and Cain's exile, Adam and Eve have another son, Seth, described as a replacement for Abel. "God has granted me another child in place of Abel, whom Cain killed," Eve declares, encapsulating both the pain and the hope for a new beginning. Seth, in turn, is associated with the pious lineage that leads to Noah and eventually to humanity's salvation through the flood. Up to this point, Genesis seems straightforward in its focus on the main characters. But chapter 5 introduces a passage that shifts the interpretative course. And Adam lived 800 years after he fathered Seth, and he had other sons and daughters. This brief mention, almost hidden within a genealogy, opens a universe of possibilities. Who were these sons and daughters? Why are they not named or described? And what role did they play in the expansion of early humanity? To understand these questions, it is essential to consider the cultural and literary context in which Genesis was written. Ancient genealogies did not serve the same documentary purpose they do today. Rather than recording every family member, they highlighted key figures who played essential roles in the theological or historical narrative of a people. Thus, the omission of details about Adam and Eve's other children may reflect the narrative priorities of the text rather than neglect. Cain and Seth are mentioned because they represent specific lineages. Cain's lineage, marked by city building and cultural progress but also by violence, contrasts with Seth's, which leads to humanity's preservation through Noah. But what about the other descendants? Were they merely extras in the grander story? Or did they play significant roles in forming early human communities? These questions are crucial because they touch on the structure of the biblical narrative itself. The silence surrounding Adam and Eve's other children leaves room for a wide range of interpretations. Some scholars suggest that the mention of sons and daughters in chapter 5 indicates the beginning of humanity's expansion through them. Others believe this passage may contain clues about the dissemination of culture and knowledge in the early ages. However, this initial expansion of humanity raises other questions, particularly of an ethical and theological nature. If all people descended from Adam and Eve, how is this possible? Marriages between siblings would have been an inevitable practice to ensure the continuity of the human race. These ideas have been widely debated throughout history, with many religious traditions offering answers ranging from symbolic interpretations to attempts to justify the practice within an exceptional context. Although the canonical text does not provide definitive answers, Parallel traditions and apocryphal texts offer fascinating insights into this mystery. Many of these sources expand on the Genesis account, adding details about Adam and Eve's descendants and their roles in forming the first human communities. These traditions not only fill the gaps left by the biblical text, but also reflect the questions and concerns of the communities that preserved them. The very mention of sons and daughters in Genesis 5 verse 4 reminds us that Genesis is not just a literal account, but also a theological and symbolic text. The stories it tells are shaped by a worldview seeking to connect humanity to God and explain its relationship with the divine. In this context, Adam and Eve's other children can be seen not just as historical figures, but as representations of broader aspects of the human experience. Genesis presents a picture that seems incomplete, but is rich in meaning within its omissions. To truly understand who these other children might have been, one must look beyond the words of the text and consider the traditions, interpretations, and debates they have inspired over the centuries. Apocryphal texts, often overlooked in traditional discussions of Genesis, represent an essential piece of the puzzle in understanding humanity's origins. These writings, not part of the official canon of the Hebrew or Christian Bible, emerged as responses to the gaps and mysteries left by canonical texts. In the case of Adam and Eve's other children, apocryphal texts and oral traditions provide fascinating glimpses into what may have happened to the descendants not detailed in the biblical narrative. One of the best-known apocryphal texts addressing this topic is the Book of Jubilees, often called the Little Genesis. Written between the 2nd and 1st centuries BCE, it recounts Genesis stories with remarkable detail. Regarding Adam and Eve, the Book of Jubilees explicitly mentions that the couple had 9 sons and daughters. These children, according to the text, married one another, an inevitable practice to ensure humanity's expansion, given that the entire population descended from a single pair. While the idea of sibling marriages may be uncomfortable by modern standards, it reflects an ancient mindset that saw such unions as a pragmatic solution for humanity's growth. The Book of Jubilees not only affirms the existence of other descendants of Adam and Eve, but also assigns them important roles in establishing the first settlements, including agriculture, building, and trade. Another significant text is the Book of Adam and Eve, also known as the Apocalypse of Adam. This apocryphal work exists in various versions, including Ethiopian, Slavonic, and Greek, each bringing intriguing variations. The Book of Adam and Eve expands on the couple's life after their expulsion from Eden. In it, Adam and Eve face the challenges of an unknown, hostile world, learning to survive while raising their children. These descendants, according to the text, play crucial roles in spreading basic skills such as food gathering and tool-making. In addition to the Apocrypha, rabbinic traditions provide valuable insights into the other children of Adam and Eve. Some ancient Jewish texts speculate that these forgotten descendants played fundamental roles in humanity's cultural and technological development. One example is the Midrash, which suggests that these children may have been responsible for significant advancements, such as the invention of musical instruments and the development of agricultural techniques. These stories represent an attempt to fill narrative gaps and highlight human contributions in areas not directly addressed by the canonical text. It is important to recognize that these texts and traditions were written in specific cultural and historical contexts, often to address issues relevant to the communities of the time. The Book of Jubilees, for instance, can be interpreted as an attempt to reconcile biblical stories with the growing ethical and philosophical concerns of the Hellenistic period. It not only retells the stories of Genesis, but also inserts moral and theological commentary, reflecting the questions faced by its original readers. Meanwhile, the Book of Adam and Eve focuses more on humanity's struggle to find redemption in a post-Eden world. It portrays Adam and Eve as heroic figures, not only for their survival, but for their attempts to reconnect with God and teach their children to do the same. This emphasis on spirituality and resilience reflects the concerns of the communities that preserve these traditions, highlighting the importance of faith and perseverance even in the face of adversity. The influence of these narratives extends beyond their theological impact. They also shaped cultural perspectives on Genesis and its characters. For example, the idea that Adam and Eve's other children played central roles in the development of primitive society reflects a view of humanity as creative and resilient, capable of overcoming the challenges imposed by the fall. This interpretation, although not explicitly mentioned in the canonical text, aligns with the larger theme of Genesis, the ongoing relationship between God and humanity in an imperfect world. Additionally, apocryphal texts often expand the roles of women, something less evident in canonical Genesis. Wives and daughters, often mentioned only in passing in the biblical narrative, are portrayed in these texts as active and influential figures. They not only play essential roles in the formation of communities, but also symbolize the continuity of life and faith in a post-Eden world. These representations enrich the narrative and provide a more balanced perspective on the roles of all of Adam and Eve's descendants. Another fascinating aspect is how these traditions connect Adam and Eve's descendants to the foundation of early civilizations. According to some apocryphal interpretations, the children of the primordial couple were responsible for establishing the foundations of communities that would become the first cultural and religious centers. These stories suggest that the enigmatic figures briefly mentioned in Genesis 5 verse 4 may have played significant roles in humanity's expansion. Despite their exclusion from the biblical canon, these texts continue to influence theological and academic discussions. They are not seen merely as alternative explanations, but as profound reflections on humanity and its relationship with the divine. By addressing the gaps left by Genesis, the Apocrypha and parallel traditions help us better understand the complexities of the biblical narrative and explore themes that still resonate with us today. These texts represent an attempt to deepen the understanding of Genesis stories and answer the questions it leaves open. Although not considered canonical, they play a crucial role in enriching our understanding of the Bible and challenging us to look beyond the written words. They remind us that the Bible is part of a larger dialogue, a dialogue that connects people and ideas across time. Genesis is undoubtedly a work rich in spiritual and narrative significance, but understanding the text within its historical and archaeological context greatly broadens our comprehension. While the Bible is not a historical document in the conventional sense, its narratives engage with cultural and social realities that have left traces in the material record. To decipher the role of Adam and Eve's other children, it is crucial to explore how the earliest human communities emerged, organized themselves, and how these stories reflect aspects of human development. One of the central questions raised by the Genesis narrative is how early humanity expanded from a single couple. Genesis 5 verse 4 mentions Adam and Eve's sons and daughters, but the text does not provide details about who they were or how they contributed to forming early communities. Archaeology, however, sheds light on the conditions under which small populations could have grown and transformed into complex societies. Archaeological studies show that the Neolithic period, between 10,000 and 4,500 BCE, was a crucial moment for humanity. During this time, people began transitioning from a nomadic lifestyle based on hunting and gathering to permanent settlements with agricultural practices. Discoveries at sites like Çatalhöyük in present-day Turkey reveal that early human communities lived in small, organized villages where extended families shared resources and worked together to survive. It is plausible to imagine that Adam and Eve's descendants, as mentioned in Genesis, might have lived similarly, with family groups forming the first societal nuclei. The Genesis narrative, in its emphasis on genealogies and lineages, reflects a universal concern of ancient cultures, the need to trace origins and transmit legacies. In Mesopotamia, for instance, we find king lists and genealogies that played roles similar to Genesis, connecting rulers to divine or mythological figures. These lists serve to legitimize power and affirm the continuity of a civilization. While the focus of biblical genealogies is on Seth's lineage, and figures like Noah, the sons and daughters mentioned in the text might symbolize a symbolic multiplication of humanity, a reflection of the cultural need to explain population growth and the spread of cultural skills. Apocryphal traditions, such as the Book of Jubilees, go further, suggesting that Adam and Eve's descendants played significant roles in founding early human societies. According to these traditions, the other sons and daughters were not just extras in the story but protagonists in their own right, responsible for developing essential skills such as agriculture, metallurgy, and music. This type of narrative resonates with archaeological records, which show the Neolithic as a period of intense technological innovation. More sophisticated stone tools, organized agricultural practices, and the first attempts at animal domestication emerged during this period, indicating that humans were rapidly adapting to the demands of a changing world. Additionally, archaeological sites like Göbekli Tepe, also in Turkey, provide evidence that early human communities were deeply engaged in cultural and religious practices. Göbekli Tepe, considered the world's oldest temple, suggests that early humans were concerned not only with survival, but also with spiritual matters. These discoveries could be interpreted as a connection to Adam and Eve's descendants, who, according to apocryphal traditions, were also responsible for passing down spiritual and moral knowledge to future generations. Another fascinating aspect is the role of women in these early societies. While Genesis's canonical text mentions Adam and Eve's daughters only in passing, archaeology reveals that women played crucial roles in the development of early communities. They were often responsible for essential tasks such as food cultivation, textile production, and the creation of ceremonial objects. In many ancient cultures, women were also seen as guardians of spirituality and cultural memory, a role that could be reflected in the oral traditions surrounding biblical stories. The expansion of early human communities also brought significant challenges, many of which are indirectly addressed in apocryphal narratives. The Book of Adam and Eve, for example, describes how the couple's descendants faced the harsh realities of a post-Eden world. Themes of cultivating the land, protecting resources, and managing internal conflicts are recurring, paralleling archaeological records. The transition from a nomadic life to permanent settlements brought not only benefits but also social tensions, such as disputes over territory and resources, which are evident in Neolithic sites. Another point of connection between archaeology and Genesis is the symbolism of genealogies. In the biblical text, genealogies highlight specific figures such as Cain, Seth, and their descendants, while Adam and Eve's other sons and daughters remain anonymous. This practice of focusing on main characters reflects a common pattern in ancient cultures. Inscriptions and artifacts often celebrate leaders or prominent figures, while the ordinary members of communities remain largely unknown. This might help explain why Genesis omits details about the other descendants. They were not the focus of the central theological message. However, contemporary scholars argue that the mention of sons and daughters in Genesis 5 verse 4 might have a symbolic meaning, representing the multiplication of humanity as a whole. This idea is corroborated by archaeological evidence showing rapid population growth during the Neolithic. Advances in agriculture allowed communities to sustain larger populations, while trade and interaction between groups facilitated the spread of technologies and ideas. The apocryphal traditions also address the issue of population growth in creative ways. Some texts suggest that Adam and Eve's descendants spread to different regions, forming clans and communities that eventually gave rise to distinct cultures. This idea resonates with the archaeological record, which shows increasing cultural and technological diversity during the early millennia of human civilization. Although Genesis does not provide explicit details about Adam and Eve's other children, it invites us to reflect on the complexity of the human experience. Archaeological records help fill some of these gaps, showing how early communities were organized and thrived. They also highlight the importance of fundamental human skills such as cooperation, innovation, and spirituality, underlying themes in the biblical stories. By connecting Genesis's narratives to material records, we can appreciate not only their spiritual depth, but also their cultural and historical relevance. The other children of Adam and Eve, though briefly mentioned, represent the richness and diversity of human experience, offering a window into the past that continues to inspire and challenge our interpretations. Throughout this analysis, we have explored the gaps left by the biblical text and the clues offered by apocryphal, oral, and archaeological traditions. Finally, it is time to answer the central question: who were Adam and Eve's other children, and why do they remain so relevant in theological and historical discussions? Genesis briefly mentions that Adam and Eve had sons and daughters after Seth's birth, but it provides little more than this statement. Adam lived 800 years after he fathered Seth, and he had other sons and daughters, Genesis 5 verse 4. The lack of specific details about these descendants contrasts with the focus given to Cain, Abel, and Seth. To understand this omission, it is important to consider that the biblical text was not written as a complete genealogical record, but as a theological narrative that prioritizes figures and events aligned with the author's spiritual purpose. Cain and Seth, for example, are not just historical figures. They represent lineages with profound symbolic meanings. Cain portrays rebellion, sin, and disconnection from God, while Seth, described as born in Adam's likeness, symbolizes the continuation of the pious lineage culminating in Noah and later Abraham. In this context, Adam and Eve's other sons and daughters were not central to the narrative of redemption and are thus mentioned only generically. However, the silence surrounding these descendants does not diminish their importance. On the contrary, it opens up space for reflections and interpretations that have enriched Judeo-Christian tradition over the centuries. Apocryphal texts like the Book of Jubilees and oral traditions have attempted to fill these gaps, assigning the descendants essential roles in founding the first human communities. The Book of Jubilees, known as the Little Genesis, is one of the most revealing sources about Adam and Eve's additional descendants. It claims that the primordial couple had 9 sons and daughters, who married each other to ensure humanity's continuity. While this idea may seem uncomfortable to modern values, it reflects an ancient cultural logic that sought to explain the population's multiplication from an initial point. More importantly, the Book of Jubilees attributes prominent roles to these descendants in developing essential skills such as agriculture, animal domestication, and tool usage. The Book of Adam and Eve, another apocryphal source, offers a more introspective account of these descendants' lives. It describes how they faced the challenges of living in a hostile and chaotic world outside Eden's perfection. These narratives humanize Adam and Eve's descendants, portraying them as resilient figures who struggled to survive and thrive. They are depicted not only as pioneers of survival, but also as bearers of spiritual values, striving to remain connected to God amid difficulties. Archaeology complements these narratives, providing a material context for understanding how the first human communities may have formed. Sites like Çatalhöyük in present-day Turkey show that early villages consisted of small family groups living in simple yet organized structures. These Neolithic settlements indicate a period of transition in which humans began abandoning nomadism and adopting agricultural practices. The need for cooperation to plant, harvest, and store food promoted the creation of interdependent communities. These scenarios are consistent with the apocryphal descriptions of Adam and Eve's descendants as founders of the first civilizations. Stone tools, ceramics, and evidence of domestication found at these archaeological sites reflect the technical and social progress attributed to the descendants in the Book of Jubilees and other traditions. Although there is no direct connection between these records and Genesis events, the parallel between the symbolic narratives and historical discoveries is intriguing. On a symbolic level, Adam and Eve's other children represent the universality of human experience. They embody the divine mandate in Genesis 1 verse 28, "Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it." They symbolize humanity's multiplication, growth, and expansion beyond Eden. While Cain and Seth are individual figures with their own stories, the unnamed sons and daughters can be seen as archetypes of collectivity, representing all human efforts to build communities and thrive. Furthermore, the diversity that emerged from early human societies reflects the complexity of Adam and Eve's descendants. The apocryphal texts suggest that these children spread to different regions, forming clans and distinct cultures. This vision aligns with archaeological discoveries, showing how human populations began diversifying their cultural practices and technologies, adapting to different environments where they lived. The apocryphal traditions raise ethical questions that remain debated. The idea of sibling marriages, for example, was seen as a practical solution in the context of ancient narratives, but causes discomfort in modern readers. These stories also reflect a struggle to balance the vision of a unified humanity with the reality of cultural and ethnic diversity. They highlight a broader ethical dilemma: how to reconcile survival's demands with emerging spiritual and moral values. The theological debates about Adam and Eve's other children show that Genesis is not merely a record of past events, but an ongoing reflection on the human condition. It invites us to consider larger questions about the relationship between God and humanity, the meaning of sin and redemption, and humanity's role in the world. The anonymous descendants of Adam and Eve are also symbolic representations of humanity's universal qualities: resilience, creativity, and adaptability. They personify humanity's potential to build, innovate, and transform even under adverse conditions. These stories are not just about the past, but also about who we are as individuals and as a society. On a spiritual level, these narratives remind us that humanity was called to a greater purpose: to care for creation and reflect God's image. Despite the fall, Adam and Eve's descendants continued to carry this responsibility, striving to maintain their connection with the divine while facing life's challenges. Adam and Eve's other children, though briefly mentioned, play a crucial role in Genesis's narrative. They symbolize the beginning of humanity, the promise of multiplication, and the potential to create and transform the world. While their specific stories are not detailed in the biblical text, they remain alive in apocryphal traditions, theological reflections, and the connections we can draw from archaeological records. The shocking impact of this issue lies not only in the mystery it carries, but also in the possibilities it reveals. It invites us to delve deeper into Scripture, explore its connections to human history, and reflect on our role as symbolic descendants of this legacy. Adam and Eve's other children are not just forgotten characters. They are the representation of a story still being written. After a journey through biblical gaps, apocryphal traditions, archaeological discoveries, and symbolic reflections, we arrive at the point of tying all ideas together to offer a final overview of the mystery of Adam and Eve's other children. These figures, briefly mentioned in Genesis, transcend their anonymity to reveal profound truths about humanity, history, and spirituality. The Bible, by mentioning Adam and Eve's sons and daughters, presents a reality that is both simple and complex. Simple because we know they represent humanity's multiplication and the fulfillment of the divine mandate to fill the earth. Complex because the text leaves open questions that continue to echo through the centuries. Who were these people? What was their impact on forming early human communities? And why don't we know more about their stories? Apocryphal texts and parallel traditions expand this narrative, offering details that, while not canonical, have enriched generations' understanding. They show us that these descendants were not merely anonymous figures, but active agents in creating societies, cultural development, and preserving spiritual values. They are archetypes of human resilience, facing a hostile world while creating a legacy that resonates to this day. Archaeology, in turn, transports us to humanity's first steps toward organization and progress. Material records reveal how small family groups, like Adam and Eve's descendants, could have expanded and transformed the land around them. From stone tools to structured communities, this evidence connects biblical narratives to tangible history, showing that humanity's effort to adapt and thrive is universal and timeless. But what does this mean for us today? The stories of Adam and Eve's other children reflect who we are as humanity. They remind us that even amid seemingly insurmountable challenges, we have the ability to create, innovate, and grow. They inspire us to look at our own lives and recognize the transformative potential we carry. What we have discussed here is only the beginning of a broader investigation into humanity's origins, the Bible's mysteries, and the connections between faith, history, and archaeology. The Bible, rich in symbolism and universal stories, is an eternal invitation to seek knowledge and understanding. If you have come this far, it means you have the curiosity and passion to dive deep into questions that have shaped our worldview. So, share your thoughts in the comments. What did you think of the apocryphal traditions? Which theory resonated most with you? Your opinions not only enrich this conversation, but help keep alive the debate about topics that connect us to something greater. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and share this video with others who are also interested in biblical curiosities and archaeological mysteries. The more people involved in this dialogue, the more questions we can explore, and the more answers we can discover together. May this journey continue, not only as an intellectual exercise, but as a way to connect more deeply with the past, with our spirituality, and with the universal truths that humanity's stories always carry.